Corda, Fótarrót Gébler, Coig Onad Cultura na Héireann, Hammersmith. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Irish Cultural Centre, Hammersmith, and welcome to the Irish Cultural Centre Literary Festival. For those who don't know me, I'm Peter Power-Hines, the current chairman of ICC. I would like to especially welcome His Excellency Adrian O'Neill, the Irish Ambassador to the Court of St. James, and his wife Aisling. Adrian has been a staunch supporter of the ICC from the day he took up his appointment in London. We will be very sad to see Adrian leaving London next year when his tenure comes to an end. We are very grateful indeed for the financial support we receive annually from the Irish Government through the Emigrant Support Programme, which is negotiated through the First Secretary, Isabel O'Connor, and our colleagues at the Embassy and the Department of Foreign Affairs. Our new building would not exist but for the initial financial support of the Irish Government, which enabled us to acquire the freehold interest in the site from the Council. We are also indebted to the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht and Culture Ireland to provide financial support, which assists with travel and accommodation of Irish artists and musicians who exhibit or perform at the ICC. We are very grateful to Councillor Stephen Cowan, the leader of London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham Council, and our Mayor, Councillor PJ Murphy, who is here tonight, for the significant financial support we have received from the Council during lockdown. I would also like to thank our local MP, Mr Andy Slaughter, who has been a staunch supporter of the ICC over the years. I would also like to thank our private benefactors who provide financial support for the fitting out of the new building and those who continue to support us annually. Closer to home, we could not operate without the hands-on support of our some 20 unpaid volunteers who give freely of their time. We also have a very professional and hard-working management team led by Centre Manager William Foote and his assistant Carrie Fuchs. Their Trojan work is very much appreciated. A special thanks to my colleague Dr. Anne Goudsmith for creating and producing and curating this festival. Finally, I would like to thank our official patrons and my colleagues on the Board of Trustees who also give freely of their time. I will now hand over to our much-loved Ambassador Adrian O'Neill, who will officially open the festival. Gurav Mahagov Galer.
Thank you, Peter, for that very kind introduction and for your very kind remarks. Just to let people know that it won't actually be departing the scene until next summer, so I can do a lot of damage between now and then. But we, ladies and gentlemen, my wife Aisling and I are delighted to be with you here this evening for the opening of the Irish Cultural Centre 2021 Literary Festival. At the outset, let me just place on record, I think, all of our shock and sadness at today's appalling murder of Sir David Amess MP. I think all parliamentarians on both sides of the Irish Sea, I think, will be profoundly shocked by and saddened by today's events. And our thoughts and prayers are with Sir David and his family this evening. Earlier in the week, we had the privilege of launching Professor Frank Chauvelin's Letters of John McGahern at the Embassy. And this evening, I recall a striking remark McGahern once made in an interview with The Guardian. And he said, "I think that each of us inhabits a private world that others cannot see. The only difference between the writer and the reader is that the writer is able to dramatise that private world." The COVID-19 pandemic has been a very difficult experience. In order to protect our families and communities, the virus necessitated a retreat into our own private worlds. For those of us fortunate enough to be secure and healthy in our homes, one unseen benefit was the opportunity to rediscover literature and reacquaint ourselves with its many pleasures. Literature offers an opportunity to unwind and escape, or indeed to engage very seriously with the issues facing the world. A good book will make you think, some will make you laugh, and others to shed a tear of compassion and solidarity. I certainly am deeply grateful to the writers who have swept me away to their private worlds in the midst of a pandemic. Whether historians, biographers, writers of fiction, or poets, they have all served to comfort and inspire us and proven our enduring need for well-told stories. The experience of the past 18 months or so has also proven the resilience of the cultural world, not least as demonstrated by the Irish Cultural Centre, who almost a year ago ran a very successful online literary programme in an uncertain and difficult context. It has also seen the very welcome uptick in book sales. Fiction sales rose by 16% in the UK last year. And this is a deeply welcome trend, and long may it continue. In the course of my diplomatic postings in Spain, the United States, and now the UK, I've been struck by the deep interest and warmth with which Irish writing and writers are universally received. Irish diplomats are very thankful to cruise in the slipstream of this soft power, to enjoy the afterglow of the roll call of Irish writers, both living and dead, who are so admired and celebrated throughout the world. In serving their craft, Ireland's writers, in Irish and English, generate immense goodwill across the globe, and despite the sometimes very local focus of their themes, still manage to evoke global affinities with other nationalities and cultures. Being very honest, this makes our diplomatic work of building relationships around the world much easier. And I have shamelessly deployed the reputational asset of Irish writers for many years. In fact, earlier this week on Wednesday, I was in Edinburgh and I made a brief courtesy call on the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. And I know she's a great lover of fiction and of Irish writers, so I brought along with me Colm Tóibín's new book, The Magician. And I walked into the room and I sat down at the little coffee table and I kind of put the book down on the table in front of me, the intention was that I would early on say, "Oh, I brought you a book," but I didn't even get a chance to say that. She kind of leaned across and snapped it up and said, "Oh, Colm Tóibín, wonderful! I want to read this book. I heard really good things about it. I love Colm Tóibín." So there you are, just to prove my point. So it's something, I say, the reputation and talent of our writers precede us. And I think the global reputation of Ireland is certainly enhanced as a result. Reviewing this year's programme for the festival, I count many names, well-known names throughout the world that are universally known and acclaimed and loved, along with some exciting newer voices. And I'm confident that the future of Irish writing, along with the attendant knock-on benefit for Irish diplomacy, is in safe hands. I also particularly welcome the attention that has been afforded to contemporary writing from Northern Ireland in this year's programme. And the Cultural Centre are to be congratulated for enticing such a rich array of talented authors to participate in this cornucopia of literature. Finally, and that reminds me, I was once advised by a colleague of mine, he said, "Pepper your speeches with lots of finalies." He said it gives people hope. So finally, in that Guardian interview, McGahern goes on to say that the private world of the writer, once dramatised, quote, doesn't live again until it finds a reader. I'm very pleased to be here with you this evening, both as a reader and as ambassador, for this celebration of writers who, as McGahern puts it, shares their private worlds with us. And also to celebrate the readers who, based on their own diverse experiences, bring these private worlds to a new imaginative life. And it's truly wonderful to be here this evening celebrating both reading and writing in the company of others. So I look forward to the rich programme ahead over the weekend and would like to thank the Irish Cultural Centre for their tireless work in making this a reality and bringing this wonderful programme to us all. So thank you for your attention. Gurmíle Mágaibh.
Thank you to Adrian O'Neill for his very good introduction. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Anne Goudsmith, who will brief you on the upcoming interview.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Anne Goudsmith, and I'm a member of the board here at the Irish Cultural Centre. My self-appointed remit is to champion Irish writers and Irish writing, and I'm very fortunate to have a supportive board who indulges me in that respect. We've been very busy during lockdown. We've supplied a fair amount of digital material, as the ambassador referred to, but it is so fantastic and it's so lovely to be back in the centre again and to be seeing people coming along and having you all in here in person. And I really do thank you all for coming. We live in uncertain times and it is so great that you've managed to turn up. Thank you for that. We have a very exciting weekend ahead. We have a packed programme of interviews, we have panels, we have readings, and we have a really amazing array of award-winning writers. I'm not even going to start naming them. I just want you to look at the festival brochure. And please, I urge you to come along tomorrow evening, all tomorrow afternoon. Our headline act tomorrow evening is Colm Tóibín, and we conclude on Sunday afternoon with a celebration of our esteemed patron, Edna O'Brien. We have a recorded interview, just recorded 2 weeks ago with Edna, and I assure you it will be a very interesting event. So I urge you to come along the rest of the weekend. But tonight, I am delighted to launch our festival with acclaimed journalist, columnist and editor Séamas O'Reilly. Over the summer, Séamas's extraordinary memoir was published. It's an account of life after his mother's early death when he was 5. She left behind her husband and 11 children. This memoir, and I think this is unprecedented, went straight to the top of the Irish Times non-fiction list. It remained there for 6 weeks, and it is still in the top 10. It is in my mind, a unique portrayal of childhood grief. It is tender, poignant, deeply moving, yet at the same time it is amusing and entertaining. How on earth, I ask you, did he manage to achieve that combination? Well, I think we're going to find out tonight. I ask you to put your hands together to welcome Séamas O'Reilly and journalist Anne Flaherty.
Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me? Yes. Excellent. Well, I'm delighted to welcome Séamas here myself. Séamas, it's your first time visiting the Irish Cultural Centre, am I right?
It is.
And hopefully it won't be your last.
No, I've already told the organisers they'll have to beat me up with a broom.
Very good. Now, Séamas has agreed to start off the evening with a reading from his book, so we'll hand over to him now to get started. Yes, you have your book right there.
I'm an extremely literal person, so it's literally just the first, basically 3 or 4 minutes of the book, I think. So it's not a huge amount. One thing they don't tell you about mammies is that when they die, you get new trousers. On my first full day as a half-orphan, I remember fiddling with unfamiliar chords as Margaret held my cheek and told me Mammy was a flower. She and her husband Philly were close friends of my parents, and their presence is one of the few memories that survive from that period. Most specifically, the conversation Margaret had with me there and then. "Sometimes," croaked Margaret, in a voice bent ragged from 2 days crying, "when God sees a particularly pretty flower, he'll take it up from earth and put it in his own garden." Margaret held me in the sort of tight, worried grip usually reserved for heaving lambs up a ladder. As she clenched my hand and told me God had specially marked my mother for death, a tear-damp thumb traced small circles on my temple. She stroked my hair. It was nice to think that Mammy was so well liked by God, since she was a massive fan. She went to all his gigs, mass, prayer groups, marriage guidance meetings, and she had all the action figures, small Infant of Prague statuettes, much larger Infant of Prague statuettes, and those little blue plastic flasks of holy water in the shape of God's own Mammy herself. So in one sense, Margaret's version of events was kind of comforting. It placed my mother's death in that category of stories where people meet their heroes, like Maureen bewildered getting a hug from Daniel O'Donnell in the Moydargle Hotel. Only Mammy's death was even better, since Mrs. bewildered didn't get to live outside Daniel's house forever afterwards, however much she would have liked to. As it happens, witnesses said Maureen cried so much she hyperventilated, leaving a shining snail's trail of snot arching from Daniel's jumper to the floor. As Margaret reassured me that God was an avaricious gardener, intent on murdering my loved ones anytime he pleased, I concentrated once more on my new corduroy slacks. Summoned from the ether, as if issued by whichever government department administers to the needs of all the brave little boys with dead, flowery mams. An infant grief action pack, stuffed with trousers, sensible underpants, cod liver oil tablets, and a solar-powered calculator. Chords were new and clean, and inordinately delightful to fiddle with. When I wrote that, I didn't realise how difficult it was going to be to say out loud. It's inordinately delightful. Most especially when I flicked my finger up and down their pleasing grooves, stopping only each time a superheated nail forced a change of hands. I think it's fair to say I had no idea what was going on, save that this was all very sad, and worse, making Margaret sad. In that way of 5-year-olds, I feared sadness in adults above all things. So I leaned my head upon her shoulder to reassure her that her words had scrubbed things clean. In truth, I found the flower story unsettling. I couldn't help picturing Mammy, lovely, tired, and blue-tinged in her flowy white hospital gown, awakening to a frenzy of mechanical beeping as the roof caved in and tubes burst from machines. "God takes the most beautiful ones for himself," she repeated in a tired rasp, as I envisaged the room pelted from above by ceiling plaster, maybe an oncologist or two getting knocked out by falling smoke alarms. God's 2 great probing fingers smashing through the roof to relocate Mammy to that odd garden he kept in heaven for some reason, presumably so he'd have something to do on Sundays. In fact, my mother died from the breast cancer that had spun a cruel, mocking thread through her life for 4 years. The hospital rang my father at 3 a.m. on Thursday, 17th of October 1991. Their exact words went unrecorded, but the general gist was that he'd want to get there quick. I can't imagine the horror of that morning. My father racing dawn, chain smoking as he managed the 90-minute drive from Derry to Belfast in less than an hour. When he arrived, she had already passed. She'd O'Reilly was dead, and my father drove back to Derry as the sole parent of 11 children.
Thank you, Séamas. That reading perfectly encapsulates the book, I would say. The poignancy, the humour, the sadness, and yet people have said they found your book extremely uplifting.
Yeah, it's been one of the real pleasures of the book doing so well, particularly in Ireland, is that Irish people are not shy about talking about what they like in a book, what the best part of it, how much their mum liked the book. It's happened quite a lot. And so I've had well over 1,000 people get in touch and say, "Oh, I really like this bit or that bit." And also people who've got in touch who have gone through the same thing.
Indeed. We're not shy about talking about death either, are we?
No, we're not. But then at the same time, like everything, we're sometimes whenever you encounter it being talked about in a different way, it can be uplifting. Because even though we do talk about it a lot, we quite rightly treat it with a lot of solemnity. And I think that's appropriate. And I think, you should be solemn and somber and respectful. But anybody who's ever been to an Irish wake, or anyone who's just had that fit of the giggles you get in an unbelievably somber experience, you'll know that it really, really helps, to have that little bit of laughter. And sometimes when I read stories about people who've had very tragic things happen to them, and there's none of that humour there, it doesn't just put me off because I'm an unserious person who just wants to laugh all the time. It's because it doesn't seem realistic to me. And I've never been in that place on that planet where bad and sad things happen to people and there's not one person acting weird. There's not one funny thing that happens. There's not one person who trips over the big plate of sandwiches, or an auntie that says the wrong thing, or an uncle that falls asleep.
Yes.
Or children, in my case. Oh, sorry. Children, in my case, tapping the microphones. Or children, in my case, saying the wrong thing at the wake.
Well, if I could just say to you that the description of your mother's wake was probably one of the funniest parts of the book, where you managed to get that, that humour, as you say, almost like a gallows humour, where you talk about the hierarchy of grief. You know, people are coming from all over, and then they're kind of looking awkwardly. Is it my turn to be in? Should I be in later? Where do I come in this whole hierarchy? Meanwhile, some child is sent off for cigarettes and only half of them come back. Someone else is drinking, some other child is drinking the miniature spirits, and you're standing there announcing at the door, and this is where the title of the book comes from.
Yes, the title of the book is a direct quote. The title of the book is Did You Hear Mammy Died? And unfortunately, as anybody will know who's been in those situations, children are usually kept on a fairly short leash. I was 5, and so I was pretty much minded the entire time, but at some awful hour, someone decided that they weren't looking after me, and I got free, and I presented myself at the front, just the front of the house, right where the front door was, and I don't know how many, but quite a few people who came to the door were greeted by my beaming 3-foot frame saying, "Did you hear Mammy died?" Like it was the news for the day. So this is what's happening today. Did you hear Mammy died? Big smile on my face. Now, obviously, a week later, I was asking, when can Mammy not be died? Because that was the thing. I wasn't a complete psychopath. But that to me is a funny story, and in my family, it's a funny story. And it was funny at the time to us. I mean, it wasn't funny to the poor people that answered the door, that opened the door.
So a lot of that humour, I think, and the poignancy and the humour come together when you have, we as the adult reader are, experiencing that confusion of the child who doesn't really understand about death. That brings a lot of the poignancy into the book, I think.
Well, yeah, but it would be. I mean, it'd be pretty harrowing if children did know. I mean, I think the alternative is worse. And it's the only way I thought I could really grind the piece was trying to write it as much as possible with that spirit of that child as it got a bit older. Because I still think about it in those ways. My memories of it are the memories of a child, by definition. So the things that are exaggerated, I think everyone's had that experience where you can remember, in my case, I can remember my first taste of a banana sandwich, but I can't remember being told that my mother had actually died, like the actual moment. There doesn't seem to be any importance ranking for things that you learn, or things that you kind of remember. So I wanted to tell it with that sort of strange, spontaneous level of attention to detail. Like the things that I remember are things like the fact that there was cigarettes on a tray being passed around like a party favour, which seems like, did this wake take place in like the 1840s?
And the fruitcake and the pyramid
The fruitcake, people coming and giving us fruitcake. And we had so many fruitcakes in the house, because I think it was it's directly in proportion to how much people love the person who's died. Is if you get given 4,000 fruitcakes, it means you go to heaven. We had so many fruitcakes in our garage that we genuinely feared that they were load bearing, and we couldn't remove them in case basically the garage would come down. But those kinds of things, as silly as they are, they kind of grounded the story for me, because if I was to tell a story about just all the sad things, and I could,
it would be a misery memoir then, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, and also it wouldn't be true, because that's not what my life was like. I mean, it was that bit was very sad, and then growing up with 10 brothers and sisters was challenging, and a single father who had an awful lot on his plate, and growing up in Derry in the 80s and 90s, had its moments, but it was also really fun. there was loads of love, there was an awful lot of laughter and teasing and mockery, and you know, the smartest people that I knew and the funniest people I knew were all people from this place. And I think maybe when I was reading books about that time, that place, or those experiences, wherever they happened to take place, I didn't always see the humour in it. I didn't always see people kind of covering it with the same totality of feeling.
Well, you mentioned there about memories and how you couldn't remember exactly how you were told your mother died, etc. And that made me think about how difficult it must have been for you writing this memoir, because you had to rely on other people's memories to fill in a lot of gaps. How did you work around that? Did you know, first of all, when you came up with the idea, how did your family react, your father in particular?
Well, my father's an interesting man. He's very, very proud of me, but he seems to think that I am an inveterate liar. So he has made this clear. My father's attitude to any and all form of writing is that it has to be an absolutely bald catalogue of everything that has ever happened. He's also a very strange man with strange obsessions about things, in terms of, he's an engineer by trade. He's kind of a fusty, sort of older gentleman, and if I exaggerate, I have a newspaper column where I often mention him, and he loves it when I mention him, by the way. If I go like 4 weeks without mentioning him, he starts getting very antsy. But if I do, I will maybe stretch the fact that he's a bit of a miser, or the fact that he's got terrible taste in music, or the fact that he's so unhip that he doesn't know what a high five is. He once literally said, "Slap my hand high up in the air," like he's from the 16th century. So all these peccadillos, I describe them, and I will exaggerate, obviously, because that's the point. And my dad will pick me up. He's threatened to write a follow-up memoir called "Did You Hear Mammy Died?" And so I tell people that, and they're like, "Oh, juicy." I was like, "No, he doesn't want to change anything I said. He just wants to make sure that everyone knows like what year the car was bought that I got wrong, or what exam results I got that I didn't mention, or what people were related to in Fermanagh, you know."
But what did he say when you came with this outrageous proposition?
He was delighted. And,
was he?
He was.
Well, how did you approach it? What did you say?
Well, I said, "I've been offered a book deal." What? And I said, "I've been offered a book deal." He says, "What are you going to write about?" He says, "I think just a memoir. I'm thinking of calling it this." "All right. Okay. Will they be paying you up front?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Do you have to pay it back?" "No, you don't have to pay it back. You can just get off this thing." But when I started, then I think he was very skeptical. Really, I think he thought like someone had like walked into the pub with trying to buy a card for some Magic Beans. "Here you go. Here's some Magic Bean books." And when it became more and more real, and he could see that it was obviously happening, and I quit my job to write the book and everything.
Did you?
I did.
That was a big leap of faith.
It was an incredibly big leap of faith, and
Did they give you a good advance?
I had a 2-month-old baby, and I was like, it was not big enough to quit my job. It turns out, but I had a 2-month-old baby, and I realised I was doing a job I hated, and why not back yourself, and why not try and write something that you think it would be worth that stress, and also just jump onto the life raft and see how far it takes you, because the working world will be there still, you know. And so when that started happening, my dad suddenly became much more interested, to the point where he started calling me, which has never happened before in my entire life. Communication with my father was one way. I ring him, that's it. And he started ringing me, and the only times he would ever ring me was if someone died or someone was pregnant. And so I was like, "Oh my God," I was thinking, my auntie was dead or something. I'd say, "Do you know the actress Courtney Cox was in Derry just there yesterday? You could put that in the book." Really? My dad's read a lot of books, so I don't know what book he thinks that would fit in. He says, "You won't believe what Sally," his dog, what she did. She went all the way out of the house, and she looked and came back and looked at me in the window.
This is the dog, isn't it?
You could put that in the book. A thing that his dog did. So that became even the stranger thing, was that he was then kind of feeding me lines, and then when the book was delayed, he was still saying, I was like, "Daddy, I can't even write the book. The book's been delayed. I don't even want to look at it." And he's still calling up and telling me Northern Irish local radio political skits that I should put in the book. And then when the book was very close to being out, I had the thrill and the privilege of going home and reading him most of it before it came out. So I hadn't seen him in over a year because of COVID and everything. And I adore him. So it was very emotional anyway. But there I am sitting with my book in e-reader form. It hadn't even been printed yet. And I was so nervous. Because as much as I do like to make fun of him, and as much as he likes it when I make fun of him in the broadsheet press for loads of people to read, I was like, this is where the rubber meets the road. Because as much as I can say it's grand to make fun of this and to talk about this, it's like there's lots of pitfalls. And I don't want to be glib. And I don't want it to be just like, by the way, my mother's death was hilarious, That's the last thing I wanted to do. And I wanted to get that balance right. So I was literally physically sweating when I was doing it. But luckily he absolutely loved it, except for me getting the dates that he bought all of his vehicles wrong.
Okay. Well, that wasn't too bad.
There was one other thing he didn't like, was that I said that he knew, growing up it was a bit like my dad knew every single priest in Ireland. This is because my dad knows every single priest in Ireland. And he really took issue with that. And after 5 minutes of back and forth, he finally admitted that about 70 to 80% would be actually more accurate.
There was one very funny piece in the book where you were all out at something, it could have been Mass, I don't know, and the parish priest decided to pay a visit, and there was nobody at home, so he jimmied open the window, came past the dog, settled himself in front of Match of the Day, ate all around him, whatever was in the house, and then your father came home and couldn't stop apologising for not being there and for not having the right food. This man had sort of trespassed into your house, and you were apologising.
Like, I've got many friends that I absolutely adore. They're not going to break into my house. No. And the weirdest thing about that story, well, there's two things. In the story that I tell in the book, it's very clear that my dad is not bothered. He's like, I'll call him the name that I called him here, just so I can't get to it. But he's like, his brother, by the way, the priest's brother, has gotten in touch to say that, his nephew to say, you didn't mention the book, but I was actually there. I was the 10-year-old nephew that actually jimmied open the lock for him. There was the utility window open, the utility room window was open slightly. And so he sent the little 10-year-old kid in there, up through that window, and then got him to open it up. So in the telling of the story, my dad's clearly not bothered. He's just delighted to see his old friend. As if all of rural Ireland is just a network of clerical bird feeders, and they can just walk in and eat us out of house and home.
And turn on Match of the Day.
So I tried to put across just how weird that was for us, that not only that it had happened, but also that my dad was so normal about it that it was normal for us. Then when I read that story to my dad for the first time, he's like, I don't understand why that's such a funny story. He was a good friend of ours. I was like, yeah, but as I said, I have friends, and I'm not going to let them break into my house. Or at the very least, if they break into my house, I'd be like, why did you do that? Why are you here now? And I see that you've helped yourself to all the food in the house. Thank you so much for coming. But he didn't. He stayed up with them and just whatever. And those kinds of things are the sorts of things in the book which people have suggested to me that they thought that I exaggerated.
Made up, yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
That was just literally how absurd these things were. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But I'm just thinking there when we talked about you trying to get access to memories so that you could construct this picture of your mother, you also had to approach your siblings. So what sort of response did you get? What kind of help did you get from them? Because not every family wants, to have to be written about.
Yeah, my family are very... very willing to talk. I'm the shy retiring violet. And we have a WhatsApp group called Best Face Forward, which is named after something that's a beloved nun in our family, Sister Bernadine. She coined it because my dad lost his leg to diabetes, and he had a prosthesis fitted, and he was in the hospital, and Sister Bernadine came into the hospital, and she kept saying idioms that had something to do with feet. It was just complete sod's law. She was just just that thing. She saying the thing. She was like, "Oh, well, the nurses around here, they'll keep you on your, they'll keep you on guard." And oh yeah, well, you're gonna have to make sure that you toe the And then she said, well, Joe, do you know what? You just need to put your best face forward. So that was the one that I was actually present for, and I'd been told that she kept doing it. It was just, that thing, there's a thing you don't want to say, and then you end up saying it. So Best Face Forward is our WhatsApp group, and it was exclusively for me to ask questions for the book. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my entire life.
Why was that?
Because our family aren't, like, as I said, shy and retiring. We're also a very huggy, loving family. I suppose you could probably connect the dots between the fact we suffered an unimaginable loss very early on, and so we banded together, and we didn't take a lot of things for granted. We were probably huggier and more free with our affection as a family than maybe some of our friends were, you know. There was a little bit less cynicism about these. It was a bit like, this
We're in
stuff
it together.
can go away. Yeah, and this stuff can go away, So maybe, we weren't like the Brady Bunch. We had loads of fights all the time, of course, like everybody else. But we're definitely people who would sit and talk the deep stuff and talk about old times and everything else, good and bad. But I'd never had an experience, I'd never had a reason to, or almost like a certificate, that I'm writing a book certificate, that I could just at any point ask anything of any of my brothers and sisters and say, oh, it's for the book. And it was for the book, but like 99% of it was never used. But I was able to write to my brother Shane. I was like, what are your memories of the funeral? Because I don't have any memories of the funeral because I was just too little and only very, very scattered memories of everything. And he told me all these stories. He told my sister Derry she cried so much that her shoe fell off. It seemed like a weird sort of a cause and effect. And she had to be taken out by our friend who was a GP to be sedated. And he just said that. I was like, wait, like a horse? Was it like an injection? Or was it, I don't know, that was just sedated. Actually, yeah, fair enough, that is weird. So, and that sort of freedom that we had to do that. And then we'd have big long threads like where everyone was chipping in. And people were tearing strips off each other for the memories. People saying, no, that's not how it happened. Like, for example, when my dad rang home to tell us that my mum had died, there are disagreements about who picked up the phone. So some of us remember that it was Dara, some of us remember that it was Sinead. Now that is so easy to, you would think that was so easy to remember, but that's something you can't remember. And because your memory is so porous, as you were suggesting, you'd think that having 10 people there to help you out, it has definitely helped, and more than that, it's helped the book have a lot more richness, and it's helped me know so much and connect more with my family and all of us together, having this the last 3 years. At least I like to say that because I've forced it on them. But also, there's still things that you can't nail down. And there's some part of you that thinks it's going to be like a Bourne movie where there's like 10 people, but they're like 10 CIA kind of satellite cameras, all, and you pinpoint them on. Between them all, you'll get a perfect image of where the submarine is or whatever. And actually, it's like trying to get 10 cats to pose for a photo. It's like they don't always connect up, and sometimes you get a lot of richness and a lot of humour, but you also realise, Jesus, we can't remember anything altogether sometimes.
But it wasn't just the siblings as well, because obviously they were also young at the time. I think you were all aged between 2 and 17. 2 and 17. So you were the second youngest then at 5.
Third youngest. So third youngest, ninth oldest, I prefer to say.
You're confusing me now.
So there's 11, so
yeah.
Sinead,
lay them all
Dara,
out.
Shane. I have to do it with my fingers, it's
You
really
do.
bad. Sinead, Dara, Shane, Orla, Maeve, they're the twins, Mairead, Dervla, Kiva, Séamas, myself, Fanua, and Connell.
Yeah.
And I was the third youngest. I was the first one born in Derry, and the rest before me were born in Enniskillen, because that's where my parents are from.
So, I mean, obviously they were going through their own thing at the time, but there were other adults that you were able to turn to, like your mother's friend Patricia, who came up with a whole bunch of letters.
Yeah. And
that was really, I mean, that must have been very poignant for you reading those letters.
No, extremely. And Patricia is one of my favourite people on the planet, Patricia Donnelly from Enniskillen. And she was one of my mum's oldest friends from Derry, where they both grew up. And she's, as you suggest, definitely a much more reliable source than the different mottled, pale children sort of ascending through different layers of not being able to remember things in my family. And she was very good at talking about my mum as she actually was. So my mum was a very saintly woman, She was an Irish teacher. She was also taught French. She worked an awful lot with charities. She was a very committed person of faith, very staunch Catholic. She was also extremely non-judgmental, and just a loving, very caring, kind person who would do anything for anybody. And the letters that I got from Patricia that you mentioned, I mean, they're incredible. They are over the course of 3 or 4 years when she had cancer, and she's spending all of her time going to the hospital and seeing other people. She's spending all of her time going to the hospice. She's spending all of her time, you know, there's one point in 6 months before she died, she's in Koblenz in Germany, because someone dropped out from Shane and Sinead's German trip. They went to the boys' school and the girls' school respectively, and they teamed up to do a German trip. Someone dropped out. My mum is currently going through cancer treatment at this point. She has 11 children, and she's a full-time job as a French and Irish teacher. So she teaches herself German, so she can go on the trip.
That's extraordinary.
And save the day, and also make sure that Sinead and Shane
Get to go.
So that's a kind of work ethic and, you know, care for other people that I can scarcely believe. But when I hear people talk about her and saying all these lovely and wonderful things, and some of you might experience this also, there's something absolutely delicious about hearing the bad stuff as well. And that's what Patricia does too. So Patricia will tell me the times when she was maybe a bit of a do-gooder, or like that she couldn't cook to save her life, or that, as she says in her very lovely accent, she had a voice that was rotten enough, a singing voice, right? It would disprove the existence of God. You know, and so that tempered it. It mediated things, and it meant that you actually had more of an appreciation, a 360 view. But reading those letters particularly, and the sort of chapter that they form, was really touching. And something that's happened since, those letters, there's 11 of them, and there's like 5,000 words, and I'm the only child that's not mentioned. It's not deliberate, it's just complete.
You're not mentioned.
I'm not mentioned by name, I'm the only one. But I've subsequently been sent another letter in which I am mentioned.
Well, that's a relief.
Yes, she was aware that I existed. And also, by the way, another thing that's happened from the book, I should say, is a guy got in touch and said, hey, you don't know me, but I was a teacher, and I went on a German trip to Koblenz, and I've got some pictures you might want to see. Okay. And he had pictures of my mum that I'd never seen before, from 6 months before she died in Koblenz in whatever it was, April of 1991. And, you know, those little gifts that you get from people reading the book or hearing about the book, I can't tell you how much that means. Just you've got 5 or 6 pictures that I'd never seen before that he just had on a roll of film that he got developed just because he read the book and said, oh God, I remember Sheila. And so then I get to see them and see her in this new context, wearing absolutely awful shell suits, by the way, in every single picture. It must have been taken over a series of days. But
they were very in at the time.
They were.
No, that's amazing. Of course, the burden of raising the lot of you fell on your father, and one of the things that you say is that his stoicism was as much a feature of your life as rain and Savlin. You know, he was the rock really of the house. He had to be. But he was also a hero to you, and there's also a very funny chapter where you talk about what's that called? The one time Daddy lifted a car.
Yeah, one time.
Tell us about that.
This one time Daddy lifted a car. So my dad is a superhero, basically. No, my dad was in the kitchen. My older brother Dara was outside. He got his cello, I think, out of the boot of the car. And the Volvo 240 that it was, and he had to open the boot. You had to disengage some little mechanism, sort of the release thing, and in so doing he accidentally turned off the brakes as well, because the brakes are connected to the electric system. And he went back, opened the boot, and then slowly didn't realize he was being rolled over at like snail speed. So he's basically being knocked over by like a steamroller in an Austin Powers movie. But he's small, he's like 10, and he's got this huge cello which has knocked him off balance. So he's slowly being crushed. And it is quite scary. His leg is literally under the wheel, and it's just about to, the shin is about to be broken, basically. And the pain starts, and he screams and screams. My dad comes out, and he lifts the car. You know, he lifts it off the one wheel. 2.4 tons of Swedish engineering. I looked it up. And Dara kind of scuttles away like a little beetle, and my dad just lifts down and he's going, oh my God. And he has absolutely no idea how he was able to do it. He admitted to me subsequently, when after the book came out, that he did go out to the garage like a couple of nights later in the dark and just like, am I secretly really strong? And he couldn't. It was obviously just that adrenaline, that sheer panic state, you know, where you just think, oh, you know, how is that possible? But the really incredible thing about that experience is that immediately afterwards, my dad was walking him. I think if that happened to me, like anything like that, I think I'd be a nervous wreck. I think I'd be just like screaming, and I'd probably be taking it out on the car or like my son or whoever. My dad was literally 9 seconds later giving my brother a thorough treatise on the electrical lock mechanism of a Volvo. And I mention that in the book, and I read that out to him in the book. And my dad's response is, well, the electrical lock is actually very interesting because the way that it works is you have to actually put it on the 1. You don't put it on the 0. And if you put it on the 1, you actually, I should have started at the start. And I was like, Daddy, you're doing the exact thing that I say that you do in the book, and I make fun of you for, and you laughed at that, and then you did it. So that's the thing. It's the stoicism that I can't even, like, he has the work ethic of a soldier ant. Like, he, you know, works like a man. He built and designed his first home, you know, at the age of 25. By the time he was my age, he had 8 kids. You know, I genuinely think that I should be on the late every night that I survive as a parent. I should literally there should be parades for me, you know, every jet of yogurt or Lego that's stepped on. And every one of my family has had that same thing where we've rung him up and said, oh, my dad had 6 teenage daughters at once when he was 50. From the age of 99 and 2000, 6 of his daughters were teenagers. I can't imagine what that was like, and I was literally there. You know, we couldn't, all of these things, when I started writing them down in the book, they would prompt me as much as anything to ring him up and just say, I don't even have a question. I'm just like, how did you do this? What was this like? And we've told so many stories about it, and we've made jokes about it, and you know, we kind of get in there before other people because they know that our mum's dead, and they know that we've got 10 brothers and sisters. So it's already a thing that people kind of want to know about. And we cover it in this sort of layer of, oh, sure, that's just the thing, and all the jokes. But every once in a while, we remember how crazy.
When you said to him, why did you have so many of us? What did he say?
Sure, which of you would I give back? Which is a very, very sweet response. And it's very nice. And that is the kind of, he's a very cuddly, lovely man, and you know, quite funny in his own way. And that, you know, which of you would give back is a lovely statement, which is only slightly undercut by the fact we immediately start suggesting candidates.
So one of the things in the background, Séamas, is the troubles. You know, there's stuff going on all around. It's a little bit like in the Derry Girls, where you have the central characters very self-absorbed with their own teenage problems, and yet at the same time there's this whole other world. How much of an impact did that have on you growing up, or did your parents shield you from an awful lot of stuff?
They definitely shielded us, and the reason that we grew up out in the sticks, so we grew up really just literally on the border with Donegal. That is not a turn of phrase. Literally, our garden fence is Donegal, Derry, Donegal, Derry. And that was partly because they were moving to Derry in 1985. They'd been in Enniskillen, and I think they wanted us out of the city mainly because they're both rural people, and that's what they like to anyway, but also because they were a big family. And maybe it would be better if we had a little bit of space we could roam around, where things were slightly less hairy or had less of a chance to be Derry. We were still educated in Derry, everything was in the city, and we were not in a townland or like a little village or anything. We were literally in the sticks. So we very much feel like Derry city people more than we feel like sort of County Derry people. But it didn't work anyway because we were totally affected by it. I mean, the IRA blew up the customs hut that we were right beside. So that's the other problem with being on the border, is that, you know, that's also a target. And so the customs hut, which is literally about as far away from me as, you know, that wall, it was blown up in 1988, and it deposited a wall of the prefabricated hut that it was made from. Terrible sort of British craftsmanship, and it fell into our field with a still smouldering sink attached to it. So it was obviously the privy or whatever. That was deemed so unremarkable that I wasn't told about it until I was 15. And it wasn't from like trying to protect me, it was just literally there had been 11 other events that weekend. The Derry Journal covered it 3 days later and it was on like page 14. And because there had been 11 and it couldn't get any attention, I kind of felt a little bit of I could feel for that little bomb, that it didn't get the attention it did because it was surrounded. You know, I, one of 11, just not being appreciated in my own lifetime as well. But like, all joking aside, the more that I've moved away in time and also in place, the more I realise how much I was shaped by it, and how much the sort of weird, the petty rigmaroles, like the fact that we had to go every day when we went to school, we'd have the checkpoint run, which literally meant men with big handlebar moustaches and dogs putting a mirrored stick under my dad's big Talbot van that we used to go everywhere in. I didn't mention this, we drove around in the most mortifying vehicle that you've ever heard of in your life, nicknamed inevitably the O'Reilly Mobile. It was a white Talbot van. It did have windows, so it wasn't like a trade van, but like we looked like, as I say in the book, we looked like a team of, like a volleyball team of young offenders, you know? We didn't look like a family transport vehicle. And they knew my dad, because we're doing this every day or twice a day. And still, just in case, he put pipe bombs under all of our feet, they'd have to do the whole thing. There were dogs and they're pointing guns. And like, that does affect you, that does have a thing. I still have a tiny, tiny little frisson when I go through Nixon's Corner, because I remember that shock. Not from guns and dogs, even, because maybe when you're a kid, guns and dogs, depending on the context, are cool or exciting. They're not necessarily terrifying. But I saw my dad go pale and kind of bristle, because there's an imposition of that. Like, why are we different? Why are we having to do this?
And how did it work out then as you were all growing older and going out for the night?
My dad would have been very, very hands-on as a disciplinarian father, in terms of not letting us stay out past this time and making sure that we couldn't do X, Y, or Z early on. So like, my older siblings have long said that they had a completely different daddy than I did, because my sister Sinead, whenever she was going out for nights out, he'd be there in that very same Volvo 240, beeping the horn at like 9:15 p.m. or whatever the time was, you know, sitting reading the paper until this time. I didn't have that. By the time I was going out, 14, 13 years later, I could stay out for as long as I wanted.
He'd given up.
Yeah, or as well, I think he just, it's the thing about my dad, is not, since I've had a son and I asked my dad for advice, he's simultaneously the best and the worst person ever to give advice, because he says, you'll know better than I will. I've done this 11 times. Every single one of you is different. And also, all the worst things you fear don't usually happen, and if you try to stop them from happening, you just end up driving yourself crazy and driving your child away. So there's no perfect reason. I mean, like, I, for example, read my whole way through the house. And if you were to say, okay, what's a really good way of getting your children to read? He'd say, well, you build bookshelves in every room and you make sure they live in a really boring place that they don't like me. But that wouldn't work for my little brother. My little brother never read anything, and that wasn't his thing. And it was different for, you know, other members of my family. We all grew up in the same house and the same thing. So he realized by the time I was going out and doing things that it wasn't necessary to be there in the car and wasting his own Friday nights. Because if we weren't getting in trouble, if we weren't coming back with bruises or getting, you know, doing really badly in school, the leash got a bit longer and longer, and we got happier and happier.
One of the things you mention in the book is about how, because everyone was at a different stage in their lives when your mother died, everybody was processing the grief differently. So there would be a time when somebody was going through the anger stage and a time when somebody else was going through, something else, the denial or whatever. And because you were so young and you didn't feel, I think you said you felt that you didn't know her as well as the others, that you didn't feel that you grieved in the same way as the older siblings, and that in a way it was almost false for you to claim that you suffered any similar pain. But you also say that this is something that came back in later life, that there were a few incidents that triggered what to you could only have been that grief for your mother. And I'm talking particularly now about that visit to Spain.
Oh yes, in Bilbao.
When you were in the museum. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was at the Guggenheim because I'm just really kind of into art and stuff. I'm just really kind of intellectual, obviously. No, because it's got a really big, cool spider standing outside it, and it's a piece of art by Louise Bourgeois called Maman, and she's done a couple of them, but they're big spiders. And in the notes beside it, it said this was Madame Bourgeois' tribute to mothers and motherhood, and Maman being the sort of Spanish Basque for mother. And I turned to my now wife, then girlfriend, and said, "Oh, that's nonsense. Spiders are really bad mothers. They just, they don't look after them at all. They kind of basically lay the eggs on the dad, and then they just piss off, basically." And as I said it, I realised I hadn't said that since I was a very young child. And I remembered that I would say that to people unaware of the reason that it meant so much to me. It was about maternal abandonment. And it would chill the room every time I used to say it. And I wouldn't know why, because I thought I was just telling a cool spider fact. And I didn't realise, no, you're the guy who doesn't have a mum who's telling the maternal abandonment fact. And so it was just one of those examples of something coming to the surface many, many years later and catching you out that you have loads of things that you don't process. And as much as I feel like I've got a very healthy attitude to my history and my past and even death and grief, like everyone has their limit. Everyone has the point at which they don't understand the feelings that they have, and 5, 10 years later, or 20 years later, or 30 years later, in some cases, you're like, God, that is really blatantly what I was feeling there, and I couldn't tell it. And I think that happens more and more as I get older, that I'm more honest with myself about my past, but it must still be happening in the present. I must still not be really knowing, how I feel about things. And sometimes when I was writing the book, I'd be writing a chapter that I felt really, really good about, and I'd go back and look at it 6 months later and say, that's insincere. That's actually not how you're feeling about that. You're actually sadder about that than you think you are.
So did you rewrite and re-edit quite a lot then?
Rewrote. And the biggest rewriting was over those things. It was things where I was like, well, I think you want to tell a good story, and you want this to be funny, and I like to tell funny stories, and there's plenty of them, but not everything has to be a funny story. And I can see on the page what you've done. I'm addressing myself here like a psychopath. But what you've done is you've taken a story which is fine on its own. You don't have to cover it in jokes. People will sit with that story, and they'll let you tell that story, and it's justified. It doesn't have to be bookended with, laughs either side. And I think that was probably the most valuable part of writing and rewriting and rewriting, was as much as I really wanted to get the humour across, and I wanted to earn that humour, and I wanted to put humour at the top table of how we deal with grief and tragedy, because I think it's often overlooked, and I think humour is often overlooked as a literary form sometimes. I also realised I was using it as a crutch here and there as well, and that's something which was really, really valuable when I had a bit more time to write it, and hack away at sort of jokes that didn't deserve to be there.
Okay, that's fair enough. Can I just take you further on in your life when you went to college and then you left and you came over here, so you became an immigrant, and you got a job in a recruiting firm. Now at that time, in around 2017, am I right? There were so many Irish coming over to London that, and being referred to you through people you know, that the firm was so delighted with you, they were giving you Marks and Spencer vouchers.
Yeah, they called me the Irish
They called
Embassy.
you the Irish Embassy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you felt, I got the impression that you were also quite annoyed by the attitude back home, that you felt that the trade-off was almost to enable, in order to justify lower jobless figures, the trade-off was so many young people were coming over here, particularly to London.
I mean, it seems pretty evident that was the case. So I moved over here 10 years ago this year. It was April 2011.
And why did you come, Séamas?
I came because I actually was lucky enough to have work, but it was very low paying work. And also there was a lot of the things that I was interested in culturally, music, literature and doing things was just getting harder and harder because there.
When you say there, were you still living in
Dublin?
At home? Or were you in Dublin? This
Sorry, I should have explained. I went to Dublin in 2004 for college, and then in 2011 moved with my partner, who's from Dublin and now wife. And it was just it was obviously a very hard time for everybody. And to be honest, I was just young enough at 25 that I didn't have I didn't have a big mortgage. I wasn't underwater with debt. You know, I had nothing to complain about. It's remarkable how much I was able to complain despite that. But I got here, and by the time I got here in 2011, so it's, there's a couple of years under the belt of things not going great, and everyone remembers those times. They're still very recent. But there were so many people here when I arrived that the going away party that I had in Dublin was smaller than the welcome to London party. And I mean specifically friends I'd made in Dublin in those last 6 or 7 years. And every single week after, as you say, more people would come, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, another person. And, some part of that was really thrilling because we're like in a new place and it's all exciting, but also we're surrounded by people we already know. It was very odd. And there was also kind of a party atmosphere because every 2 or 3 weeks there'd be a new injection of, Lauren's moved over. Oh my God, that's great. Okay, we'll make sure that she moves here. It's like we were setting up all our little toys.
And you had 3 siblings here as well, didn't you?
I had 3 siblings and now I have 6 here.
6?
6 in London or
it's like going back to the 50s.
It is. But I was literally getting people jobs through this one recruitment agency. They were lovely people. I'm just saying, because we were all massively overeducated and we were, in terms of for people who couldn't get a job in their home country, and they were just eating out of my hand. It started off that they'd say, yes, get in touch with the CVO. So I'd ring up and say, I've got a friend coming over. I said, oh, great, fantastic. Then pretty soon they didn't even have to go to a pre-interview. Then they started calling me. So they'd literally call me and say, yeah, we've got a typing job coming up in 2 days. I'm like, we've got just a fella. As if I was running a competing agency. They sent me a Christmas card every year. They sent me Marks and Spencer's gift cards occasionally. And it was just a really weird snapshot of just how strange it was when we moved over. And we were absolutely broke. And I never did any creative writing or any creative job really for that whole first 6, 7 years, because it was just about earning, and it was such a novelty to be in a job which had promotion prospects. I mean, in my case, it was really terrible, boring jobs in recruitment companies. And
but had you at what point had you long wanted to be a writer, or where did all that come from, do you think?
That came from reading an awful lot as a child, and also from writing bits and pieces. I would have won a lot of little story competitions and poetry competitions, but it kind of, when I went to college and I was surrounded by people who were rich. I went to Trinity.
Oh, were you one of the Trinity set?
Well, technically, because I came from the north, so I didn't have to pay any money or anything. And I got there and I was like, I'd never met a rich Irish person before. I literally, this sounds like a line, but I literally never conceived of such a thing. And it seemed bewildering to me and so strange. So I always had to work through college. And that meant there was less time to be on, say, the university newspaper. And also when I kind of hung out with those people, it was like, I don't want to be on the university newspaper. And the idea then, once I left college, of like going and working and doing like an unpaid internship or something at the Irish Times or whatever, it's like, I can't do that. That's ridiculous.
So how did you get into journalism and writing then?
Literally writing stupid things on Facebook. I wrote a really, really, really stupid post about terrible ideas for podcasts. And one of them was Dustin for Prince, and it was Dustin Hoffman reviews the albums of Prince. So the Irish Times came knocking, and literally they printed some of them, and I said, look, I didn't realise you were going to print them. How about I write you, what's an article that nobody else in your office wants to write? Right, I'll do it. And that was Lawrence Mackin, took a chance on me, and said yes. And I went and I wrote something stuffed with jokes and whatever, and I wrote it on time, and I said, okay, what else you got? And then just week after week. And then within about a year or two, I had a column, and that literally everything came from that.
And now you write a column about parenting.
I do. I'm the only person on earth who's ever had a child, so
Indeed.
they snap me up.
And I was just wondering if there's anybody in the audience who'd like to ask Séamas a question. We have a roving mic. Just put on my glasses now.
Yeah, we got a mic here, folks. If anybody wants to put their hands
There's,
up,
somebody
I
up
can
at
pass
the
it
top
around
here.
down front. Thank you.
Yes, I do have a question. I empathise greatly with what you're saying because I was number 7 of 10. My father was an engineer. My mother died when I was a child. Here's the thing. Daddy ruled the roost, obviously, but it was my older sisters who actually did the heavy lifting in terms of cooking, cleaning, baking, washing, and running the household. How did that function in your house? Did your older sisters have to take over that part of the mother's role?
That's a really good question. The answer is, partly, yeah. It wasn't broken down boys and girls, so we also had to do all the washing and cleaning all together. But I was very much raised by my older siblings as well. And I think the bit that I really go into detail with is Maeve and Orla, who are the twins. So they're actually kind of in the middle. But they came up with this rota that was who was going to do cleaning on what day and whatever. And the rota was very successful, so much so that they were nominated for a Young Citizens Award, kind of like a Pride of Britain Award, and were brought over to London, which we mercilessly teased them for ever after. But the bit in the book that I mentioned about that is that we teased them about this because it seemed like they were kind of like putting themselves forward as these people who were saving the family. But what I forgot was 3 months after my mother died, they were 11 years old, 12 years old. And my dad was obviously despondent, but didn't crack and never collapsed in a lot of ways that would have been utterly forgivable if he had, People would have forgiven him for cracking or for needing extra help. And he didn't. But he couldn't handle the Christmas presents. It was something about, maybe it was the thing that he liked doing it with my mum, or there was something else he just couldn't do it. And so Maeve and Orla stepped up. And so they, at 12 years old, or 11 years old, sat out in a little, we have a caravan, and they sat out in the caravan where they wouldn't be found as 11-year-olds, and they picked out the Christmas presents for everyone. They'd only discovered the provenance of Christmas presents themselves a year earlier. And at the time, obviously, I thought of them as my older sisters. And now I think of them as 11-year-old girls. And you're just like... And we tease them so much. And stuff like that kind of really... it puts it back on you. When you start thinking about, jeepers, how much of this stuff is... You don't appreciate it at the time, I think. And I think... Yeah, writing the book has really, really helped me with that. And it has also allowed me to apologise to both of them in print and in person and say, I'm really sorry for slagging you off all the time. Thank you for the Christmas presents.
Can you remember what you got that Christmas?
Yes, I got an incredible John Deere green tractor. And we also, of course, the whole place was filled with people who were so lovely and good. Obviously, they knew the crack. So we had so many strangers, and well, not strangers, but people that we wouldn't expect to be giving us toys, coming in and giving us toys. And so it was a very bountiful Christmas in that respect. And obviously, I was blithe enough at that time to just think, wow, this is a good Christmas. Wow.
Anyone else? At the back?
Hi there. I absolutely loved the book. I thought it was brilliant. The first time, though, that I read your writing was a Twitter thread about you being on ketamine.
Oh, yeah.
While serving Mary McAleese. How influential was that in terms of bringing your writing to prominence?
I'd say very. So if anybody doesn't know, that's lies. That never happened. No, when I was 18, I moved to Dublin. I'm not going to tell the whole story. This is a 10-second version of it. When I was 18, I moved to Dublin. I got a job in, I can say it here among friends. I've never actually said it. It was in the National Concert Hall. And I was there one night, didn't realise that I was supposed to be working, ended up working, and what they didn't realise is that I'd been with some friends and I'd taken a little bit of something I shouldn't have taken. And I was a very, very green child and teenager. I wasn't that kind of person who was going out and drinking all the time, didn't even smoke until I was in my 20s ever. So it was a big shock to me. And in this tweet thread, I go through all the things I'm feeling, what it was like, how lovely Mary McAleese is and was. And it went completely bananas. It's about 40 tweets long, because as you can tell, I'm very concise. And by the time I got to tweet 12, my phone was basically unusable because there was so many things happening. And so I think about 80 million people have read all those tweets now altogether. It's a bizarre, silly bolt of lightning. There's an old adage that Twitter is a game where you never want to be the main character every day. Like every day there's a main character on Twitter and the game is not to be it. Well, I was it, and it was fine, it was great. And loads of things came from that. The book deal kind of did come from that. I already had a book in preparation for another publisher, and that kind of petered out. But certainly the attention I got absolutely greased the wheels with this book. And as the book doesn't cover any of those things, the book stops well before that, and it's not about those things. But the fact that people had seen my writing and could see, oh, this person can tell a story. My Observer column, some genius named Eva Wiseman, who I adore, she said, oh, that was a good story about taking ketamine with Mary McAleese. I wonder if he would like to write about parenting for us.
It's kind of hard to get from A to Z on that.
Yeah, well, but I think that's the same thing that you look for, is you look for voice and character and zip. But the really, really best thing about that happening is I can trace loads of amazing things from that thing. And it frees you of a lot of petty vanities, because I still think I'd be every bit as good a writer and every bit as smart and wonderful and whatever, but there's a chance that I just didn't get up that morning and see that tweet and respond to it, or I started it at the wrong time of day and the Americans didn't see it, or I got called into a meeting halfway through and it was cut off. Like, there's so many lightning bolt things. It's absurd and silly and stupid. So many people saw it. Even if I do genuinely think it's very funny, I'm very proud of it. I love when it comes up because I love to talk about it. It's not one of these sort of things where it's like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. I think it's really silly and really stupid, and I love it. But I also can't get too big for my boots, because I would recommend it to anybody. Get that jolt of fame from something so stupid that it keeps you grounded and that it keeps you humble, because you can say every day, there's no reason why that should have gotten so big. So just wise up.
Where can I buy ketamine?
Well, you can get it from a vet. Vets, people say it's a horse tranquilizer, but it's more commonly a cat tranquilizer, because basically they give it to all animals. This is not like from the Ketamine Council, by the way, but I hate it whenever because people say horse tranquilizer to make it seem either really sordid and seedy or like really cool and rad, and like it's neither thing. It's just it's a drug you give cats.
Have we time for one more question?
Down the front.
Oh. Okay, I can answer that one after.
Oh, all right.
This guy's
squeeze the two in.
Cheers. I really loved the book until I found the audiobook had come out, and that was perfect. I was just wondering, you'd mentioned in towards the end of the book in relation to the hierarchy of grief. Does that still apply in your family? Do you feel like that's still relevant?
I do think it's relevant. I think it's a tricky one. I use the term hierarchy of grief in terms of, first of all, my family. I think it's very different losing your mother when you're 15 from losing when you're 5. And I've had that experience. I'm sure anybody here who's been bereaved at an early age has had that experience where people have come to you for advice. And maybe I feel like a fraud, because if someone my age now, some 35-year-old comes up to me and says, say their mother dies, their father dies, which now happens every once in a while, I always feel like I've literally no advice for you, because what can I apply? Like, just, okay, here's my advice. You write this down, be 5. Because I don't feel like I have any kind of genuine thing. The only thing I would say would be the sort of stuff that I've intuited anyway, which is, take your time with it, make sure you feel, you allow yourself to feel happy, allow yourself to not feel guilt. Because that was the other thing, was I had guilt about the hierarchy. I had guilt about the fact that I didn't know my mum as well as my other brothers and sisters. I mean, I mentioned in the book, one that was really painful to remember just because it's embarrassing, was there was a woman who came around and she did I think it was like blood donation, or it was like giving you jabs, or whatever, it was an injection involved. And this very nice nurse was there, and my mum knew all the nurses because she was always going to the hospital and seeing sick people, because this Saint Mammy, as she was. And so she was telling me all these stories about my mum, and rather than being like charmed and delighted as I usually was, I was all those things. But then I slowly started to realise, like, this woman has more memories of my mother than I do. Because I was 5 when she died, and she knew her when she was a fully grown adult, and she would have seen her, say, 20 times. She's got 20 memories. So in order to kind of one-up her, I would be scrambling to think of something I knew about my mum. But I didn't know that many things about my mum. I knew like 9 things about my mum. So she'd be saying this lovely, beautiful story about how my mum had come in, and she'd sort of been such a figure of grace to this woman that she used to care for. And she'd tell me this beautiful story, and I'd be like, oh yes, and allergic to bees, of course, because that's all I had, And to some extent, getting over that shame and that grief was a big part of the book. It was really useful. And in other ways, it dredged stuff up. And I mean, the last chapter kind of deals with that a bit more, where I would just, I'd have moments where it was too much, and it was more than I could bear. But really, the only thing that's ever helped has been talking about it and writing about it, and increasingly now hearing from people who have read the book. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is that you buying and reading the book is instrumental to my mental health. So, and to answer your question, my dad never did remarry, so he's single. Yeah.
Still available.
He's still available.
I think that just about wraps it up. Séamas, I just want to ask you one last thing: will there be a follow-up at all?
Well, my dad, of course, has threatened. Did you hear Mammy Died?
What are you working on?
I mean, almost certainly. I'm working on a few little things which I can't talk about.
Okay.
One's fiction, in another medium, like they might hear on the radio, and then there might be something TV-ish. Mm-hmm. But in terms of book, I'm going to take a little break. Mm-hmm. I've definitely got some ideas, and yeah.
Well, whenever
something will fill out. I'll be here every week now, so I can just tell you.
Whenever you're finished, we hope that we'll see you back here on this stage. And thank you very much, Séamas O'Reilly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Séamas, and thank you, Anne. I think you answered a few questions that I had about the book, but what I think really came across in that interview was the towering presence of your father, which was, really in the book it was there, and it certainly came out in that chat. And the other thing which I really enjoyed is the way the book actually brought some photos of your mum back into your life. I think that's a lovely product from the book. Even if, especially as well as making lots of money, that's a nice thing to have. And I just want to say a final few thank yous. I have not done this festival on my own. I have some people that I would like to say a thank you to my colleagues here at the ICC, William Foote and Ros Scanlon, and Emma Byrne, who just joined us temporarily 2 weeks ago and has whipped us all into shape in no time at all. We have a fabulous team of volunteers here at the Irish Cultural Centre who will be working tirelessly tonight, tomorrow and Sunday, so thank you. A special thank you also to two of my ICC Book Club members, including Anne Flaherty here and Dorothy Allen, who have helped me in more ways than they know to put this show together over the next few days. I also want to thank the writers and the interviewers who have travelled from Ireland and also from Hackney, because obviously without them we wouldn't be able to put the show together, and a really big thank you to you, the audience. And a thank you down there to Jerry Logue, who has sorted us out with music and lighting, and to Shea Mary Doyle for editing the Edna O'Brien interview, which we are doing on Sunday. So all that remains for me to say now is to urge you, if you haven't bought Séamas's book already, and you would like a signed copy of it, the book is for sale in the foyer, and Séamas will hang around, and don't keep him talking too long or we won't get out of here all tonight. So thank you all very much for coming. I hope you've all enjoyed the evening as much as I have. Thank you.